With Big Ten Media Days just around the corner, I thought it would be fun, exciting, and appropriate to release to you all my own personal all Big Ten teams for the 2022 season. I'm talking about the offense today, obviously, and in a few days, there might even be a video sandwiched in between this video and the video talking about my all Big Ten defense, but that will certainly be released well before, and by well before I mean a few days before, the media days do hit us. It's going to be exciting. The media days are going to give me a lot of content, and it's going to give you, the people, and myself too, a lot to just look into, a lot to listen to. I'm excited to hear what all the coaches have to say, what the players have to say, and what the media thinks about each team heading into the 2022 season. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. If you're on the YouTube, make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts and any changes you'd like to make to my all-conference offense down below. The majority of you who watch my videos, I have noticed, are not subscribed to this channel. So it would help me a lot and help you a lot if you like this channel if you just hit that big red subscribe button. And if you are listening on the Spotify, make sure to follow this channel. So without further ado, let's dig down and get dirty and get into college football. And first and foremost, talk about people who didn't make my three teams, the first, second, and third team, per usual, but guys who are still good and who deserve recognition. At quarterback, those are Talia Tagovailoa at Maryland, Casey Thompson at Nebraska, and Payton Thorne at Michigan State. All of them good within their own right. Funny enough, all of them do have run capability, and they run the ball more than a lot of guys that we'll be talking about who made the 1, 2, and 3 list. They're all quarterbacks who all have the potential to make that top 3. I just don't see it happening for 2022, whether it's because of their play or their supporting cast. At running back, you have Chase Brown from Illinois, Anthony Grant transferring into Nebraska, Mayan Williams, a backup at Ohio State who's just such a good player that he deserves recognition, and Evan Hull, a starter at Northwestern. Brown and Evan Hull both surpassed the 1,000-yard mark. Anthony Grant had an amazing career at the New Mexico Military Institute, which is a JUCO college, and Mayan Williams, very solid backup, definitely has the body and build to be an NFL running back. At center, you have Luke Weipler from Ohio State, and you have Logan Jones, who's the projected center for Iowa. It's hard to replace Tyler Linderbaum, but Logan Jones, Iowa believes in him, and if Iowa believes in him, I believe that he is going to be a solid player. We'll just have to see, because Linderbaum's been there for so long, but I have faith in him. You should too. At guard, you have Matthew Jones. Matthew Jones is from Ohio State. You have Sione Finau from Purdue, transferring in from Florida International University, and you have Turner Corcoran, who I had as a guard in my Nebraska video. It seems like a good fit. He gets burned on the outside, but he has the talent and the physical build to play on the inside. Same thing with all of the guys mentioned there. At tackle, you have Logan Brown, vaunted 5-star, came out of Michigan, went to Wisconsin, who's been dealing with injuries. I think that he is going to have somewhat of a breakthrough year this year. You have Mason Richman, who's at Iowa, and then you have Teddy Prochazka, who is one of the better linemen for the Cornhuskers. At wide receiver, Mitchell Tinsley, transferring in from Western Kentucky. He had over 1,000 receiving yards. Fantastic guy. Part of me wanted him to put him at the third or second team level for the Big Ten, but he played at Western Kentucky. Penn State's not going to be passing that much, and it's a different field of play. He's going to be facing better corners. But I think that there are reasons to be very high on him. I would not be shocked if he was the best or one of the best wide receivers in the Big Ten. A lot of upside with him. You have Charlie Jones, transferred from Iowa to Purdue. I think that he can maybe be Purdue's guy at wide receiver. We'll see what happens. Parker Washington from Penn State, Roman Wilson from Michigan. At tight end, you have Cade Stover from Ohio State, Bretton Strange from Penn State, and Luke Schoonmaker from Michigan. At kicker, you have Mitchell Fenneran from Purdue, and at return specialist, Emeka Egbuka, Aaron Cruikshank, who transferred in from Wisconsin and does well at return specialist and wide receiver, and Trey Palmer, another vaunted five-star talent who just hasn't made the field, but he transferred from LSU to Nebraska to get some playing times. That's my honorable mentions. We'll now move on to my third team and start at wide receiver with Dante Demas. Demas had 507 receiving yards last season and 3 receiving touchdowns, and he led the conference in receiving yards before his horrible injury in Game 5 versus the Iowa Hawkeyes. He went down. The ship was already sinking at that point as Talia Tagovailoa just continued to chuck it into the always amazing and outstanding Iowa secondary. I think that even with his injury, which was horrendous, his entire leg was just hyperextended and wrecked, I think he's going to be back, and he's going to help Maryland have one of the better passing offenses in the country. You have Tyler Beach at tackle for the Badgers, one of the offensive linemen who is returning from last year's once again great Wisconsin O-line. Had some early struggles, but they were much better at the end of the year, and expect Tyler Beach to be one of the better players on this offensive line. You have Chuck Filiega at guard for Minnesota, transferring in from Michigan, playing at Michigan on the offensive line, getting in the rotation when players were down, and then transferring to another great offensive line school. Expect him to make strides and be a part of a Minnesota O-line that lost all but one of their starters last year. We'll get to that one returning starter later because he's higher than the third team. At center, you have Joe Tippmann, another returning Wisconsin Badger on the offensive line, ranked second in offensive line grading, or offensive center grading, from Pro Football Focus. At guard, you have Kevin Williams, another transfer for Nebraska. This is a common theme here. He came in from Northern Colorado. I'm very high on him, his build, everything about him. The only concern is he didn't play much football the year prior to coming to Nebraska, and he's had to really work on getting himself back in shape. But I like Kevin Williams here, and I think he's going to be one of the best players on the Husker offense. And then you have Trente Jones at tackle for Michigan. And Trente Jones, he's filling in a hole in Michigan's O-line as the position he's going to fill in. There was a guy who departed that position. And Trente Jones, it's a battle between him and I forget the name of the other guy. He just escapes me. But from what I have heard, Trente Jones is coming out on top there. He's going to be a part of a very stacked Michigan O-line. And in saying that, it looks to be like he will be one of the weaker players there. And if you're one of the weaker players on Michigan's offensive line, you're still a really great player. It just speaks to the volume of how good Michigan's offensive line is. At the other wide receiver part, you have Emeka Egbuka. With the departure of Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, there's going to be 2 new guys starting at wide receiver for Ohio State. I think that those are Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka. I'm higher on Harrison. We'll get to him much later. But Egbuka is here. He's going to be a good return specialist. He's also going to be a pretty darn good wide receiver. Egbuka had just over 100 receiving yards last year, no receiving touchdowns. And at quarterback, I have J.J. McCarthy. McCarthy he got a lot of playing time for being a backup. In fact, his red shirt was burned. He had 516 passing yards, 5 passing touchdowns, and I have him overtaking Cade McNamara for the starting quarterback job. And I think that he is going to be a good, solid quarterback for Michigan. I think that there's a very good chance that he will be Michigan's best quarterback in the Jim Harbaugh era. At tight end, you have Payne Durham from Purdue. Durham caught 6 touchdowns last season, had nearly 500 receiving yards, and with Jackson Anthrop and David Bell leaving, I would expect him in the tight end position as a whole, as Purdue's other starting tight end returns, to be utilized a lot more by quarterback Aidan O'Connell and offensive play caller Jeff and Brian Brom. At running back, you have Jarek Broussard and Donovan Edwards. Jarek Broussard had to play behind a horrendous Colorado offensive line, and he decided that he's going to transfer to Michigan State, which is a program that is in a much better position than Colorado. Broussard had specifically 661 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 4.7 yards per carry, and he had a much better 2020 campaign. I expect him to come to Michigan State. The offensive line at Michigan State isn't going to be great. I think it's going to actually be below average, but it's going to be better than what Colorado has, and with a better play caller in Jay Johnson and just a better system and team all around, Broussard will shine. I imagine he will eclipse that 1,000-yard mark. Donovan Edwards at running back, I have being the backup to Blake Corum. Michigan's running back rotation means Edwards will get significant playing time. It is a possibility, though unlikely, that both him and Corum could get over 1,000 yards. But Donovan Edwards, outside of being a threat on the ground, he only had 174 yards last year on the ground and 3 rushing touchdowns. He's dangerous through the air, where he had around 300 receiving yards, had an insane game against Maryland where he had, it was over 50-yard touchdown reception against Maryland. So Edwards here, he's a backup running back that, like Mayan Williams in the honorable mentions category, I just think is good enough to be praised and talked about and represented here. At kicker, you have Timmy Bleekrode from Nebraska, coming in from Furman. Very successful career there. He'll be an immediate impact on the Huskers for special teams. And at return specialist, you had A.J. Henning, who returned a touchdown again against Maryland on a nice trick play for special teams. And outside of that, he's a good receiver, and he's especially good on end arounds and outside runs, utilizing that wide receiver or wide back, I guess, since he's used on the ground a lot, position. Moving on to the second team. The second team here, there are some more obviously impressive names. In a certain sense, there are more familiar faces, especially at running back, but also at kicker, wide receiver, return specialist. Both are Jaden Reed at kicker and not kicker, return specialist and wide receiver. You also have Rakeem Jarrett, and we're going to start out with him, and we're going to do exactly what we did for the third team. Rakeem Jarrett had nearly 1,000 receiving yards last year, had 829 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. I think because of the injury to Demas and Jarrett's 5-star status out of high school, he's going to surpass Demas, but both are going to be fantastic. And combining that with the talent of Talia Tagovailoa at QB and Maryland returning all 5 of their offensive linemen, again, that passing offense is going to be scary. Ryan Hayes at tackle for Michigan is returning from last year. He is one of the 3 players on that Michigan O-line that won the Joe Moore Award to return from last year's campaign, along with guards Zach Zinter and Trevor Keegan, who, as you can probably guess, are on my first team. We'll talk about them later. At guard, you have Donovan Jackson, who, like Jarrett, was a 5-star coming out of high school. He got some playing time last year, showed some flashes, but was redshirted. This season, I do expect him to be on that starting lineup to fill in some holes, and I think he will be pretty good at it. At center, you have John Michael Schmitz, who, like Joe Tippmann, everyone's very high on according to Pro Football Focus. He is the highest rated Big Ten center there. And with Tyler Linderbaum gone, it's John Michael Schmitz, Joe Tippmann, Victor Oluwatimi, I think, are the top 3 centers there. Michael Schmitz is the only one from Minnesota's offensive line last year to be returning this year. And I think he will very much anchor that O-line and help them to continue to succeed. And more so than not reload at the offensive line position. At guard for Wisconsin, you have Jack Nelson. Jack Nelson, another guy returning from Wisconsin's offensive line. Joe Rudolph, he's gone off to Virginia Tech, but Wisconsin's offensive line, when you just return some starters there and you have the coaching of Paul Chryst, and it's almost a Wisconsin tradition to just continue to be good at that offensive line position, you got it. And Jack Nelson has the size, the technique, he has it all, along with most of the offensive linemen here on this list. And I think that, look, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Iowa, Ohio State, the Big Ten's very deep at the offensive line position, so being on a third, second, or first team and just being above the honorable mentions category means that you have some potential, not just at college, but at the next level too, as an offensive lineman. And at tackle for Ohio State, you have DeJuan Jones. DeJuan Jones played last year, and he's going to play again this year. In Ohio State, they ran for a while that 4-tackle system on the offensive line, which was strange, but I think it's going to help their tackles this year, as they're going to be deep at that position. They're going to have a lot of experience at that position, and DeJuan Jones is certainly going to be one of the better tackles in the Big Ten. Jaden Reed at wide receiver is a very curious case. He decided to come back to Michigan State for another year when he could have easily went off to the draft and got drafted pretty high, but he's a 1,000-yard receiver. He had 1,026 receiving yards and 10 receiving touchdowns. He also returned, I think, 2 punts for touchdowns too. So that's why he's, for both wide receiver and return specialist, on the second team. If there was an all-purpose position, he probably could be on the first team for that all-purpose position. He would certainly deserve it. The issue is at wide receiver. Jackson Smith-Njigba's returning. I think Ohio State's loaded at that wide receiver position. That's the only reason he's not higher. He's a fantastic, elite NFL wide receiver. Him and Payton Thorne are really going to help Michigan State's offense continue to stay afloat and thrive despite the loss of Kenneth Walker and others on offense, including Connor Hayward. And yeah, at tight end, you have Sam Laporta. Sam Laporta was one of the leading tight ends in the Big Ten last year, had 670 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. Iowa and their tight ends are something else, and I expect Laporta to be great this season. The loss of Charlie Jones and Tyrone Tracy at receiver for Iowa hurt as well, so Laporta is probably going to get even more targets than he did last year. At quarterback, you got Aidan O'Connell. I think it's O'Connell and Stroud as the top 2. Stroud is 1, O'Connell is 2nd. It's very hard to make an argument to surpass those 2 or replace those 2 with someone else. O'Connell, very solid quarterback. When he doesn't turn over the ball, there's an argument to be made that he is the best quarterback in the Big Ten. Aidan O'Connell, he had 3,712 passing yards, 28 passing touchdowns, 11 passing interceptions, and he had the 5th highest QB rating according to ESPN. Yes, his returning wide receiver production is not going to be the same because of the losses of David Bell and Jackson Anthrop, but Charlie Jones and Tyrone Tracy are coming in from Iowa. Payne Durham is returning. A lot of the offensive line is returning. And Aidan O'Connell just getting more experience, improving as a QB. I expect him to play at the same level, potentially play at an even greater level, for sure statistically, as he didn't even start in all of Purdue's games last season. Jack Plummer was initially the starter there. At running back, you have Braylon Allen and Muhammad Ibrahim, both from the West Division, and both are very solid running backs. Allen is much more of a speedster. Ibrahim has just power. When I think of him, whether it's in the Outback Bowl versus Auburn a few years ago, whether it's him playing against Ohio State before he got his horrific Achilles injury, it ruptured, it sucks, or whether it's in 2020, I just think of power behind that awesome offensive line. Braylon Allen, on the other hand, he was a 17-year-old, and he rushed for 1,268 yards, 12 touchdowns, averaged nearly 7 yards a carry. It's nearly 21 feet that he gained on average every time he touched the ball. That's crazy. Allen, while I don't have him on my first team because he hasn't caught the ball a whole lot, I think that much like Wisconsin's offense, he is in a certain sense one-dimensional, somewhat unproven, but that's not to take away from the fact that he's still an elite running back. There is an argument to be had to have him on that first team. There certainly is. And because of the way Wisconsin plays ball, out of all the Big Ten running backs, I think he has the best chance to win the Heisman or simply get to New York City and just be a part of the award ceremony. Ibrahim's coming off from that horrific Achilles injury. He only had 163 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. And PJ Fleck said that he's doing well, that he's recovering, and I believe PJ Fleck when he says that. And I think even with the loss of production at offensive line, just having John Michael Schmitz returning and having Muhammad Ibrahim healthy, again with that power, you give the ball to Ibrahim, and there are not going to be too many times that even if you get penetration past that offensive line, you're not going to prevent him from crossing that line of scrimmage. That's the kind of running back Muhammad Ibrahim is. And then at kicker, you have Noah Ruggles, one of the better kickers in the nation, only missed 1 field goal, I think, for Ohio State, and that was in garbage time versus Michigan State. A clutch kicker, came in from North Carolina, and he is one of the best in the nation. Again, can't say that enough. And then there's the first team. And like I said in my most recent video discussing Michigan versus Ohio State, this is exactly why. They make up 40% of my all Big Ten team, and they dominate the first team offense. The first team defense is much more balanced, and that part of that's because Michigan loses a lot on defense, and they're not going to reload in that same way, and it's going to take time for Ohio State to improve on defense. But on offense, Ohio State's great there. They return a lot at skill position. They're great at reloading at wide receiver, and Michigan just returns. They return 8 out of 11 offensive starters. And in one area where they don't return their starter in center, they bring in an All-American from Virginia. Let's start off with Jackson Smith-Njigba, a guy that I love talking about because he entered as the 3rd man for Ohio State last year at wide receiver, and he led the team in receiving yards at the end of the year with 1,606 receiving yards, 9 receiving touchdowns. He is the number 1 wide receiver nationally. Jordan Addison, Cedric Tillman, those are the 3, in my opinion. And Jackson Smith-Njigba, I think there are reasons to separate him from the other 2. He has it all. Footwork and speed, agility, catching. He made some insane catches against Utah, and I know Utah's secondary isn't the greatest thing in the world, but it was fantastic. There's a reason he had nearly 400 receiving yards in that game, because Stroud can trust him. Stroud can heave it up to JSN and know that JSN will catch it. At tackle, you have Peter Skornowski. Peter Skornowski, highest-rated recruit in Northwestern history. An offensive lineman. And what makes it even better is that Pat Fitzgerald, last year they didn't have great trench play, but Pat Fitzgerald is all about fundamentals. And the biggest fundamental you can have is having good trench play, and it explains why Peter Skornowski went there as a 5-star and has only improved since day one. He by far is the brightest spot on Northwestern's offense, and if Northwestern's offense has any success this year with their tough schedule, I'd credit a lot of it to Peter Skornowski. And his, not just his play, his size, his work, but also to his leadership in a certain sense. He's the best player for Northwestern, and I can't wait to see what he does there. A lot of people like him. He played well last season, and I like him too. At guard, you have Zach Zinter. Zach Zinter returning from Michigan last year, and that offensive line It was named the best in the nation. It was exposed during the Orange Bowl, yes, but returning anyone from that offensive line is huge. And that is why Zach Zinter is here. And I think that Michigan's offensive line, with the next guy coming up, Alu Oluwatimi, has a chance to be even better than last year. Alu Oluwatimi had All-American honors at Virginia. Virginia, yes, they play in an easier conference, but you also have to think that they have poorer coaching there than at Michigan, and they have worse talent overall. Oluwatimi was only a 2-star coming out of high school, transformed himself into an All-American. Imagine what he is going to do with offensive line coach Sharon Moore and Zach Zinter, Trevor Keegan, Ryan Hayes, and Trente Jones surrounding him. Don't forget about tight end Eric All, who can block pretty well as well. So this Michigan offensive line, there's a reason that they're here on this first team list, especially the interior. It's why Michigan was so good at, frankly, running up the middle in repetitive fashion last year at points. And on the other side, you have Trevor Keegan, too. I think that Michigan's 2 starting guards are the best, or at least among the best, in the Big Ten at this position. Trevor Keegan started last year at guard and returns again this season to play. At tackle, you have Paris Johnson, who many have already considered as an NFL talent. He returns to Ohio State. He's going to be the best tackle on Ohio State's roster and the best tackle in the Big Ten East. I'd say for offensive line, at guard and center, I'd say it's Michigan, but on the outside, part of it's because the 4-tackle system Ohio State ran at points. At tackle, Ohio State takes the cake with Paris Johnson and DeWand Jones. At wide receiver, obviously, first we talked about Jackson Smith-Njigba. Now we're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr. only had 139 receiving yards and 3 receiving TDs, and most of those were in the Rose Bowl. But that's part of the reason I like him so much. That Rose Bowl game, it was Jackson Smith-Njigba, and it was him. Those were the 2 wide receivers. Emeka Egbuka got some playing time and receptions, but Harrison looked to outplay him there. And with a preseason, not off-season, we never say that here, shouldn't have crossed my mind, with a preseason with Brian Hartline, spring camp, summer camp, fall camp, all of that stuff, to work with Brian Hartline, Marvin Harrison is going to take that next step. He's going to showcase himself as an NFL wide receiver this year. Jackson Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming, if he is healthy and takes steps forward, he could also have made this list. We just have to see. That's going to be a hydra. That's going to be a 3-headed monster with Jackson Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Emeka Egbuka. At quarterback, you have CJ Stroud, who, in my opinion, is the best quarterback in the nation, or who is going to be in 2022. Bryce Young, I think, was the better player last year. But Stroud, nonetheless, had 4,439 passing yards, 44 passing touchdowns, and had the highest quarterback rating of any quarterback, according to ESPN last season. And he had the second highest passer rating, only behind Grayson McCall, who set the record, breaking Mac Jones's from 2020. So Stroud is a very impressive player. He's going to have a good O-line to work with, good wide receiver room to work with, elite wide receiver room, pardon me. And if he goes down, he has solid backups too. But this is talking about Stroud, and Stroud is looked at as a first-round quarterback already. It's just going to be a matter of time seeing how well he does in 2022, and if he has the season that I think he will have, which could involve breaking some records. I've made a video on this, that he could be viewed as that number one overall pick. There's a very realistic chance of that. At tight end, a guy who is rising, or who could very well rise through NFL draft boards, you got Eric All. Eric All came out of Ohio, committed to Michigan, phenomenal athlete. He saved Michigan's season against Penn State. Eric All only had 2 receiving touchdowns, yes, 437 yards, but Michigan Michigan at a point last season was only behind the service academies in how much they passed per game. Michigan is a team that likes to run the football. Because of the departure of Hassan Haskins and the defense probably not being as reliable, definitely not being as reliable in the pass rush, Michigan's likely going to have to pass more this year. And if J.J. McCarthy starts, it's going to be a better passing game, in my opinion, for sure. So Eric All, I think that he's going to take a big step forward. I have him being the best tight end in the Big Ten. At running back, you have TreVeyon Henderson. TreVeyon Henderson had over 1,000 rushing yards this past season, had nearly 1,300 of them, 15 rushing touchdowns, nearly 7 yards per carry as well. Henderson, I think, is the best individual running back in the Big Ten. Could push for that number one individual spot nationally. I just think Deuce Vaughn is the only one who's ahead of him in that category. And then you have Blake Corum. I think Blake Corum would be the 1B to TreVeyon Henderson's 1A. Henderson, I think, is definitely the overall better guy, but Blake Corum certainly is. He's a great running back. Let's call it what it is. Last year, he overtook Hassan Haskins early on as the starting running back for Michigan before going down with an injury in the Michigan State game, which kept him out of the Indiana game, the Penn State game, and the Maryland game. If not for that injury, he certainly would have crossed 1,000 rushing yards, as he had 952 rushing yards for 11 touchdowns and averaged 6.6 yards per carry. Henderson, Corum, you put those two together as a running back duo, I don't think there's any better running back duo than those two. And I'm saying that as I think that Michigan's running back room, that duo with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, is not only the best in the Big Ten, but there's a huge chance that it could push for best nationally, too. At kicker, you have Jake Moody, who was an All-American first team last year. He returns. Amazing, clutch kicker. There's a reason he has the name Money Moody, as they call him. He's a fantastic kicker. And then at return specialist, you have Charlie Jones, who returned, I think, both a kick and a punt, if not more, for a touchdown. Last season, transferring from Iowa to Purdue. I talked about him earlier as a wide receiver, but the return specialist aspect is why you need to be scared of this guy. He went on as a walk-on at Iowa, started his career at Buffalo, and now is taking his chances by going to Purdue, a school that utilizes wide receivers very well and develops them very well. Case in point, Rondale Moore, David Bell. He's going to show himself as a good wide receiver, and his return specialist abilities, they'll probably improve seeing the school that he is going to. And that right there is the video. It's my first team, all Big Ten team, and I already talked about the second, third, and honorable mention teams as well. All of these players, yes, I made criticisms of some, if not most of them, but all of them are good. I just made criticisms of them in regards to the other good to great to elite players surrounding them. None of these players are bad. They are all great players, probably at the minimum. And then the first teamers are the elite players or the great players that just have such good supporting casts or coaches that they're likely going to improve or be made to look like elite players. Let me know what you think of these lists of these teams, and let me know your thoughts on this video. Make sure to comment your thoughts down below, just like I stated. Hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and click the notification bell so you can get notified when I post content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.